So to start this hand, Foxen and I, of course, the two key players in it. He's got looks like about 3,500. I think I've right around starting stack. It looks like I have 2,500 myself. Landon Tice gets dealt ace-2 suited under the gun, raises to 60, which is very typical open. I have pocket kings here in the cutoff off of starting stack. So since we're still playing pretty deep effective, even though Landon's below starting stack. So my 3-bet size should be to about 3.5 times his open. This is a very typical 3-bet size in position for the stack depth. You don't really want to go smaller than 3.5x when you're over 60 big blinds deep effective. Foxen here has ace-4 suited in the big blind. So generally speaking, when you're talking about using 4-bet bluffs, you generally want to have some type of ace in your hand. And actually unblocking some of those middling high broadways isn't necessarily a bad thing, because I'm going to have a hand like ace queen or ace jack or ace 10 or king queen, those types of hands. So his ace will block the strongest hand possible, pocket aces. It also blocks like ace king type hands too. And the other thing too, with it being suited and connected, is when I do call, he does have that extra equity. So generally speaking, these cold 4-bet ranges tend to be some of these suited wheel aces, ace-5 suited being a pretty common and popular one. So I decided to call pre-flop. The main reason being is, even at 100 big blinds deep effective, if I go all in, his calling range versus my jam is probably only ace king suited, pocket jacks maybe, and pocket queens plus. So if I jam, there aren't that many hands I'm going to get called by. And Foxen, being a very good theory player, who I also expect to lean slightly towards too much aggression in some of these spots, like let's say when he saw this ace-4 suited, he might not have used a randomized device to decide to 4-bet. He might have just gone, okay, I think Ryan's going to be 3-betting light here pretty often, and I have a really good cold 4-bet candidate, so I'm just going to use it. Which, if that's the case, then he is going to be cold 4-betting me way too often, which means it's in my best interest to keep in all of his traps. It's my best interest to trap to keep in all of his bluffs. So calling hand like pocket kings pre-flop can be a little bit scary. That being said, since I'm keeping his range as loose as possible, I'm going to end up making more money long-term versus him. On this flop, he has a fairly easy continuation bet. I mean, his cold 4-bet range, even if it does have some extra bluffs, still is an incredibly strong range and is still at an advantage, or we're about to flip versus my calling range. Going to be pretty close. I guess I'm probably at a slight advantage, but I guess probably not a massive one unless he's really, really going too hard. Either way, in general, on flop, he just has a fairly easy continuation bet. And being a 4-bet pot, he doesn't need to go very large. So he's only going to see bet about a 5th pot. Interesting. I forgot about this upsize. On flop, I guess he has a couple different options. Generally speaking, I would probably lean towards going more in the 5th pot, quarter pot range for the most part. That being said, on the flop, this is a very dynamic board texture that connects with both players' ranges. And when he upsizes, he actually gets to force out a lot of hands with good equity that I might have. He might be trying to get a hand like ace queen suited to fold, ace jack suited to fold, queen jack suited to fold, apply a lot of pressure on hands like my ace 10 suited, my jack 10 suited, 10-9 suited, also hands like 7-8 suited and 8-9 suited. So while I was a little bit surprised to see him upsize, and I'd actually forgotten about that, it's him choosing so occasionally isn't really surprising, considering this is a very dynamic board texture, and there are a lot of hands in my range that he can apply a lot of pressure versus. So once I do call and this turn 5 of clubs hit and he checks to me, I actually have two very viable options here with pocket kings. I think most people here with pocket kings would just go all in. I have only about a half pot bet, about 55-60% pot, and the turn 5 of clubs adds a flush draw to go with. So the turn 5 of clubs adds a flush draw to go with. So now the best hand possible changes on deuce of clubs, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace. So this is a hyper-dynamic board. And usually in these like hyper-dynamic situations, you generally just want to play your strong hands for value. However, I thought almost all of the hands in his range that have good equity would just jam the turn. If he has ace jack of clubs or ace queen of clubs or 10x of clubs even, I think the only hands in his range that might not jam that have like a draw in it might be like ace king with the, of clubs, king queen of clubs, which I don't block. So there aren't that many hands in his range that are going to check the turn that have a lot of equity versus me. Almost all of his hands are going to be hands like ace queen, ace jack are probably checking the turn at somewhat high frequencies. He could maybe have aces, but even like that, I would expect to just jam the turn. So I actually thought when he checked to me that the main types of hands he would have would be his exact type of holding. Ace deuce through ace nine suited that isn't a pair. I think for the most part, he just has those types of hands. If he doesn't have that, maybe he has a hand like ace 10. So pretty much every hand in his range, I thought I had drawing essentially stone dead. So on the turn, even though this is a really dynamic card, and technically the best hand changes on almost every card in the deck, it's actually my hand is so strong and so well protected that this is a great trap candidate. So that's why I decided to check back the turn 5 of clubs. On the river ace, this is a card where not only with his exact hand, but with a lot of his range, he wants to block bet. A lot of my flop calling range that checks back turn are going to be hands like pocket queens, pocket jacks, hands like I might even have like a king queen occasionally, but I'm mostly going to have hands in that range like queens, jacks, maybe jack 10 suited type hands, 10-9 suited. I would assume 7-8 suited, I'd probably just jam the turn and turn it into a bluff, but I can very easily have queens, jacks, and hands like jack 10 and 10-9 suited. I can also have ace 10. I could have ace queen and ace jack. I can have this trap, which he probably doesn't really expect me to trap super often here, but I certainly occasionally can have those hands. So obviously with this, I have an easy jam. And his decision, I think, is fairly interesting. If I'm him, I would call versus me as well. I don't think he can fold this. A couple different reasons as to why. First of all, he's getting 4-1. So he only needs to be right here 20% of the time. And when you only need to be right 20% of the time, if I have a decent amount of bluff combos possible, it makes it very, very, very hard for him to fold. First, let's look at the type of value I might have in his mind. I'm going to have like maybe ace 10 of spades. I'm going to have even like ace king, I'm probably just jamming turn with. Ace queen and ace jack, I might not actually jam the river for value. So like my value jams are like pocket kings, pocket tens that I decided to trap. Ace king of clubs, king 10 of clubs, ace 10 of clubs that I decided to trap on turn. Not that many things. Queen jack suited, I could have that, but even that, I'm probably jamming the turn occasionally with my queen jack combos. Like this is the stuff that he's thinking about is what value do I have? And actually in this hand, it's pretty easy to find bluffs. The types of bluffs that I have is I have pocket queens, I have pocket jacks, which I have 6 combinations of each of those. I have jack 10 suited. All of those hands are really, really, really good bluff candidates. And they make pretty good calls as well. So when he block bets, I have a decent portion of my range that can call a small block. And then I also have a decent portion of my range that can bluff jam, and then he can turn his hand into a bet call. So I think that obviously that he played this hand perfectly. I would assume theory, if you put the hand into whatever GTO calculator and you run it out, I would assume his hand, based off how pre-flop and flop played, probably pure blocks the river and then probably calls versus my jam a pretty high percentage of the time. I think overall that this hand just shows, at least in my opinion, that both of us have a pretty good theory understanding of the game and that both of us in this hand we're trying to play as theoretically as well as we possibly Good. I think the only thing that might not have been theory was my turn check back with kings. I would assume that it probably just jams, but I decided to slightly exploit a little and check back when I thought his range had much less equity versus me than what it might in theoretical situation.